Hey everyone, I'm Caitlin Barnard.
And I'm Victor Gamov.
In this series, we chat with software developers and technology leaders to tackle your biggest API connectivity challenges.
Stay tuned to this episode for tools, tactics, strategies that will help you to take your distributed architectures to the next level. Let's begin. And today I'm super excited that I have Ben Greenberg, developer advocate from Orbit, and Ben here to talk to us about some language agnostic tools and how they use GitHub Actions at Orbit. Ben, welcome to Concast.
Thank you so much for having me, Victor. I am so delighted to be joining you on Concast. This is going to be a great conversation.
Before we jump right into the topic about all these automations and all these things, can you talk a little bit about yourself? Like, what do you do and how you end up in the world of developer advocacy? Like, it's going to be a little bit meta podcast because the Orbit helps developer advocates and the community leaders and other specialists who engage with the live audience, with developers, with system administrators, and all sorts of people around the communities.
That is a very good question. I feel asking any developer advocate how you ended up in developer advocacy could always be a fascinating question to ask because we all have our own journeys, how we ended up in this bit of a particular and a little bit of a niche role, which I love. It's one of the most favorite things I've ever done in my life. So I ended up as a developer advocate. I was a developer for a bit at a financial services corporation in New York. And it was great work building algorithms to calculate residuals and a lot of SQL, more SQL than I ever wanted to do again in my entire life. And at some point, I discovered there was this role where you could take off the headphones once in a while, get away from the keyboard and communicate with other developers and understand their needs and feed those needs back into the products that you're working on and help inform the engineering and the product teams and iterate on the products from that perspective of the developer. In essence, you can be the developer user number 0 in the product cycle of development. And I discovered this role and it was called developer advocacy. I'm like, this is amazing. And so I applied for a few roles and I ended up at a communications API company for about 2.5 years, working on their voice API product line and on their SMS API product line. And I got to do some amazing stuff with SDKs and met thousands of developers and open API specifications and all kinds of fun stuff like that. And now I ended up here at Orbit, and we build tooling to help communities grow and understand the insights and data around their members, how to really fully understand who their community is and build a unified picture of that community growth.
That sounds exciting. It's also very, very much aligned with the thing how I like to see developer advocacy. It's exactly like developer 0, kind of like a patient 0.
Exactly.
Type of fun that we like to talk about this one. Before, engineer will engineer features. Like, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be amazing. But I like to say that we have this like a unique position where we can influence some of the developments because usually we know how the people use our software, right? That's why we're here. So we also partially technical. I had this conversation
sometimes
this week. Yeah, I have to show my credentials that I'm also technical. I'm not just a token face. So the many things that we do is all about learning our users, learning what they do and how we can help them better. And specifically, how we can help them better, we need to understand their problem first. What and how we can understand the problem. There's plenty of ways where the people go and complain on the internet, right? And Orbit actually helps to aggregate those places where the people complain so we can understand where to find the valuable information.
Exactly. Where they complain, where they discuss things, where they share feedback and ideas. So one of our fundamental principles that we believe in at Orbit, and I think this will really resonate, is that community doesn't just happen on a single platform. Right? Community happens on a Twitter thread. It happens in discourse. It happens on Discord. It happens on Stack Overflow questions and answers. It happens on Reddit subreddits. It happens on comments on YouTube. And it can be really hard. And this is something I get actually a lot of feedback on. It can be really hard to understand a single member of your community across all the different places that they exist on. And so one of the cool things that Orbit does is it gives you that aggregated, collated member unit across all those platforms. So it's a single member with multiple identities. And that's actually kind of language we use, right? So it's a one-to-many relationship. You have a single member and they can have an identity on Stack Overflow, an identity on several blogging platforms, an identity on GitHub, an identity on GitLab, identities all over the place. And we bring those all together for you and offer analytics and reporting to help you engage and understand their particular needs in a bit more of a, I would say, coherent fashion.
Yeah, it sounds like a very much real world implementation of this meme where you see kind of a bunch of pictures like this is me on Twitter, this is me on GitHub, this is me on LinkedIn, this is me on Instagram, and the different photos that show you like different ways. That's exactly what Orbit does essentially. it's based on our discussion, based on our conversation. And one of the things that the good about the show is that we will get to show you what the Ben was talking about. So it's like stick around and stay with us. We will demo some of the product features. So how long you been with the Orbit at this point?
So as you know, there's human years and there's developer advocate years, and they're not exactly the same.
Yeah.
So I've been in human years. I've been at Orbit for about 6 months. And in that 6 months, we have done so much. We're a very fast-paced, nimble startup. When I joined, I was employee number 10. And now we're on the cusp of about 25 employees or so in the past 6 months, which in real terms is a lot of growth really fast. And it's been an adventure. So 6 months in human terms, quite longer in developer advocate terms.
So like the reason for this question is kind of like a build up. Like I want to understand like what did you learn? Maybe like some of the 3 fascinating facts about where the people interact more, or where developers interact more. What would be, say, we're talking to some prospects and we're telling them, hey, there's some of the communities that you need to be engaged on Stack Overflow or Reddit, or forget about Reddit. It will not fit in your profile in your organization because your users usually not hang out there. Maybe your users will hang out on GitHub discussions and Twitter. So like something, maybe you have some like eye openers and some of the things that you learn and say, wow, I didn't know that like before I started, doing this research.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting. What I've discovered is that there isn't really a one size fits all perspective when it comes to this. And actually every kind of niche developer community has its own niche platforms in which it's existing on and preferential spaces that they kind of occupy. And, without overgeneralizing too much, but, there's something you said about game devs kind of occupy certain spaces more than, financial services developers might occupy. And, communities around developer tooling might occupy different spaces. And then that's on kind of like the macro level, but even on the more micro level, even different product lines, even different toolings within the same kind of space will have different emphasis depending on what they do. And actually, I would say a lot of that depends on where you as a company or you as a product community initially invest in creating spaces. And so, a lot of initial product communities do a bit of a scattershot approach when they're first starting. And so they're a bit of on everywhere. They're everywhere at the same time. So that means you've created a lot of disparate spaces for people to exist on. And so then it becomes a bit more challenging as you grow. It gets actually exponentially harder as you keep on growing to manage all those different places. That's one side. The other side is you may have been very focused initially, and you may say, I only want to really generate conversations on, I created a discourse instance, for example. And that discourse instance is where I really want questions and answers and community support. But then your members start going on Twitter all the time and raising questions, and they get feedback on there. So they're getting that sense of like responsiveness to those questions. And suddenly Twitter becomes a more active space, even in ways you haven't or didn't necessarily anticipate or even necessarily want desired. Some of it is you lead the community, and others, the community is leading you. And you have to kind of be in the moment with them and understand where it's happening and where it's growing organically. So I that didn't really fully answer that question, Victor. I kind of answered without answering.
No. That's actually a perfect answer. And this also will give the perspective for our listeners as well. There's like when you try to build a community, it's not like you will be surprised in terms of you trying to people like steer somewhere, but to quote Jeff Goldblum, nature will find a way from the Jurassic Park. Nature will find a way. The user will find a way how they can organize. And what's important to understand is that like, if they self-organize somewhere, just need to help them. So do not try to, to break this habit and to try to steer them somewhere. Just be there where they are. That's your purpose, essentially.
So
not
true.
Where you want them to be. Eventually they will be, but it requires trust and patience. But
it's
be there.
So true. That's such a good point.
So that's my kind of like a rule of thumb of thinking about like where to interact with our users. So since we're talking about all these communities and all these things, like integrating this stuff would be really hard. You need to manually parse the HTML pages. You need to do all these kind of things, right? So that's how you do in the modern days. Just like write the bot and start scraping the pages and analyze these pages, right?
Exactly. It's kind of a bit of a big proposition that the product took was that you give us data and we will help consolidate it, aggregate it, and present it to you in a way that's meaningful through reporting and analytics. That's a huge proposition to take, which means we need to be capable of absorbing and offering you multiple pathways to bring in that data from what is honestly an ever-growing list of community tools. So when I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned in the past 6 months, there are so many community platforms that are popping up all the time. I'll give you one example, which from my own ignorance, I didn't even know about until a few months ago, was a platform called Circle. I don't even know if you're familiar with it, but I had no idea about it, right? So I didn't know what it was. And suddenly I was getting communities of product coming and asking about how we can create integrations and connectivity between the Circle interactions happening on Circle and feeding that into Orbit to help give a more comprehensive picture of their users and user engagement. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what Circle was. So the first thing I had to do was go to my search bar. I'm like, what is Circle? And then, that reality TV show from Netflix popped up first, like the Circle dating show. I'm like, no, not that Circle, a different Circle. Naming is ingenious sometimes.
Right. If you remember the times of the early Web 2.0, we kind of like understood that the startup or like the service or something is actually from the Web 0.2 era. It should have something like a at the end. Twitter, Tumblr,
Twitter,
the other things, and usually you throw in some of the letters there, so it look cool. But now it's getting ambiguous, I would say, right? With the circle, like, oh, what is that? Like,
yes.
Okay,
what is that? I remember the '90s when everything had to have an E in front of it in order to be a real digital service.
E-shop. Like e-business, right. I still remember the running some of the IBM computers, and when server starts ready for e-business. Oh, okay, it's no fun here. It's just only business here. So
exactly,
with integration these services, like integration this platform, like I was joking, like for the people who was like thinking like what Victor's talking about, like scrapping internet. I was actually joking because it's a podcast about connectivity, a podcast about APIs, and we're living in the world post Web 0.2 era. And one of the factors, one of the components of the service that would belong to Web 0.2 is like exposing the APIs. So users can create the more like user-generated content based on the sum of the data. So that's why we were looking to integrate to certain systems through sets of APIs. And that's where we, want to spend some of the time discussing this type of stuff. So does the Circle thingy has an API so you can easily integrate with your platform?
Circle does have an API. Using that example, which I think is a really good example of kind of, I would say, and I'm sure you agree with me on this, sort of like the evolution of SaaS products nowadays. They all, as you just said, have to have an API that goes along with them that's externally accessible and available. So here's a relatively new community platform that offers a lot of value to its members, and they want to integrate that data. And immediately out of the box, they offer API functionality to their users. So you don't have to scrape the website. You don't have to try and, use Nokogiri or something to try and find the HTML tags and get the data. There's a REST API that you can use. And sometimes it's a REST API, sometimes it's GraphQL API. Kind of depends on the engineering team and their preferences. But whatever it is, it's usually there, and it may require OAuth and require a bearer token. They all kind of do their own thing, and the structure they're trying to figure out, as long as it's secure, is really what's most important at that point. But it's there. Yes.
And the most important with the emergence of the protocols like OAuth is really not about security, but I would do like a little bit more like a philosophical. It's about like understanding like what access you as a user providing to the service provider. Like I like the some of the presentations when the people start explaining the OAuth and they bringing up this old times of what is that, like Yelp, when the Yelp were asking you to enter your email and password in order for them to send emails about this new cool service called Yelp to your contact list. And the protocol like OAuth is actually helps users to understand what kind of data APIs will be able to share. So like when you connect to these platforms, those API levels will be graded by, certain access. You can access to certain APIs, you cannot access to certain API. You can restrict this. You as a user and the owner of this data, you will be able to restrict and tell where this stuff is coming from. And most importantly, like who will be able to see it. And this type of things is becoming like more important in the recent years, based on the the things that happened in Facebook and how this data was used, and so all this kind of information is very important in terms of like
there were issues with Facebook.
I don't have issues with Facebook. I don't have a Facebook. Like I do have a Facebook, but I don't really use it recently, and I'm kind of happy about this. So
your life is probably a bit better for it.
Yeah. But like still cannot give up Twitter. It's my thing. So speaking about the APIs, so what's your take on the APIs? You prefer raw APIs or you prefer SDKs? Since you have a view to this point as an expert, being the engineer and the developer advocate who work with the company who provides API, now you work with the company who consumes the API. So what is your take on this? Like, do you prefer having,
so actually we do
APIs?
A bit of both, right? We consume APIs and we provide an API, so we're kind of in that middle space. I actually think you have to answer that question by asking another question, which is, what is the need that you are trying to provide for your users? And an API is a tool to help accomplish a need, and so you have to first wrestle with that primary question. And I think at the most fundamental level, the answer to that primary question is you're trying to help your users accomplish and solve problems as expeditiously and as painlessly and maybe as enjoyably as possible. So if those are my goals, if that's what I want to accomplish, and I have a few tools in my tool belt, I think I need to solve that with the tools I have. And my goal as a developer advocate is to help, and I think you might agree with this, is to help my users do that, solve things expeditiously, painlessly, and joyfully. And so SDKs, kind of what they do is abstract a lot of that work out of you, out of the domain of the developer building something. They don't have to worry about the peculiarities of the API or figure out pagination, because every API does pagination a little differently. They don't need to think about all those little nuanced details. What they only need to think about is, I need to solve this problem. What is the function or the method that I can invoke in this SDK to accomplish that for myself? And does the SDK help me do that in a way that's faster, more expedited, easier than just making the HTTP calls to the API myself? If the API only makes HTTP calls to an SDK and that's all it does, I would actually argue it doesn't really serve a purpose. Most developers can write HTTP calls whatever language they're developing in. And SDK's goal is to actually do a lot more about that, is to wrap that and provide another layer of handling errors and handling pagination and thinking about, what goes wrong and how to handle when things go wrong and all the different kind of questions and problems, and take that off the shoulders of the developer building something, so they can focus on what they're building and less about the tool they're building with.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Sometimes, and I like your answer about like it's because it's a little bit of both. Sometimes when the people just starting to do some things, they want to have like a fast track to get something done. So in this case, the SDK is like properly designed, and the SDK that will have some of the idiomatic constructs that the people will easy to grasp in the language that they use. But we do have 10x developers who have opinions about this, and like they start looking, okay, so this SDK using some library that I don't like because blah, because it's not reactive, it's not, or maybe it's too reactive, or I'm exaggerating here. Do not go and start typing comments and saying, Victor, what are you talking about? There's no too much reactive thing. But I was trying to say that SDK should not do more than you can do with API. So everything that you do still needs to be available through API if people decide to come up with some alternative implementation or whatnot.
Absolutely. Yes,
sometimes
totally.
like Ben mentioned, the convenience and the idiomatic the framework use, I think, is one of the most important selling points of using SDK versus API. So let's talk about this a little bit. So you probably seen that different APIs come in different shapes and forms. You already mentioned that some of the services expose GraphQL, like GitHub version 3 API exposing GraphQL now, which is previous versions they were exposing just a REST, like a traditional REST API. What's the most exotic thing that you've seen in terms of like what service exposing some, maybe the sub-service still exposes like SOAP or like XML gRPC or XML RPC type of thing. I believe the WordPress still exposes XML RPC, right? For publishing stuff.
I believe that's correct. Honestly, nowadays, I don't really find a lot of those exotic APIs so much. They've kind of standardized.
Yeah.
I don't know. How about you, Victor? Do you still see any of these exotic things out there in the wild too much anymore?
So I think we touched this about a little bit when you were talking about like financial services and things like that. Unfortunately, not every bank is still exposed the APIs in the form that we want to consume. Like there's some of the banks that still require you, instead of like using OAuth in order to you kind of as a user logged into your website, you still need to do, provide these username and password, and after that, some of the services will be able to connect to your bank. That's unfortunate. There's actually, fellow developer advocates, I think, and business owners in the financial industry think about this. It's a huge opportunity to, but the banks and financial institutions, they always were more conservative about like use of technology. They were dealing with big stuff here. So that's like most exotic things that I see in the real world, and I'm still like, really? In 2021, you cannot provide the normal API?
If I see that kind of abnormal authorization patterns, like almost like dark patterns or anti-patterns, nowadays, it kind of like throws me off, and I actually will stay away from that API.
Yeah.
Because what else is going on wrong there? I don't want to talk too much about working in the financial services industry because I have a lot of things to say, but I probably can't by legal contract. But there's a lot of stuff that happens under the hood that you see as an engineer working in one of these companies that would make you second guess doing business with the financial services world at large. Not to say any one specific company, just at large. But having seen that, it's kind of like when you're a cook in a fast food restaurant, you never want to eat in a fast food place ever again. So it's a kind of a similar experience. But those are red flags for me, when I see those anti-patterns for authorization, because they make me think, well, what else is happening if that kind of bad behavior is happening there?
Yeah, I agree. It sounds like a really not enough investment into the modernization of the field. But like anyway, I think there's opportunity there, and there are leaders who understand this, and they also the finding their ways to provide to make the world a better place in the financial services. Let's talk about how you would integrate this, and you can talk a little bit about just like overall technology that you use, and we will, when we move to our demo part, we can expand on this more.
So I can set up the problem first. A couple problems, right? We wanted to address. One was, we wanted to enable people to build tooling to connect third-party APIs and their data to Orbit, and we wanted them to be able to build that tooling in whatever language that they wanted to build in. So if they were a Node.js developer, to be able to build an NPM package. If they were a Python developer, to build Python packages. If they were a Ruby developer, to build Ruby gems, right? We didn't want to privilege and say, you have to build this in this language if for .NET and C# and .NET, and it's all we're going to accept, or only Go, or whatever. So that was one problem. And the second problem is we wanted these integration tools, right? Essentially these integration libraries to be as accessible as they possibly could be. Understanding that our audience encompassed people from the most senior developers, principal level developers, to people who are just opening a code editor for the first time in their lives, to people who are kind of in that like no code, low code and indie hacker space, who may have varying levels of comfort with code or no comfort with code and need to integrate this data for either personal reasons or professional reasons. So we wanted to build something that would accomplish all of those goals. And those goals all seemed kind of hard to be able to accomplish at once. But we were struck actually by, relatively, it's a bit not so new anymore, but still kind of new in the life cycle of like software. The service offered by GitHub called GitHub Actions, which if you're not familiar with it, or if any listeners are not familiar with it, it's basically a runtime environment provided by GitHub. It's provided to every account, 2,000, I believe, runtime minutes a month, which is quite a lot. Unlimited runs, unlimited repos you can run it on in your GitHub organization or GitHub account. And you can do a lot with GitHub Actions. Most people have seen GitHub Actions. Will have seen it in the context of workflows running their CI/CD deployments. So like, CI checks, testing suites, maybe, managing release flows, things like that. But there's actually so much more you could do with GitHub Actions. There's really no limit to what you can do with GitHub Actions. It's pretty agnostic as far as what you choose to do with it. And we decided that we would make GitHub Actions one of the prongs of our tooling, because, what's really cool about GitHub Actions, Victor, is that like the runtime environment supports almost every language a developer is going to write in today. Mm-hmm. So that accomplishes that first problem, right? So you can write your tool in basically any number of languages, maybe not COBOL, but you can write your tool in any language today and be happy and enjoy writing, and it can run on an Actions runtime environment. So we're not going to say you have to write these tooling in X, Y, or Z, where you could do whatever you want. So that accomplished that first step, which opened it up to devs to write in whatever they wanted to. And then the second thing, which was making it accessible. Well, we could talk a bit about how we made it accessible, but we did that essentially by offering Actions as a third way to use the libraries. And we can show that. I could show that as we walk through like exactly how we did that.
And now this exciting part where the Ben will demo some of the cool integration with us. Ben, take it away.
Awesome. So what you're looking at right now on my screen is, let's see if I can make it a little bit bigger. What you're looking at is the homepage for GitHub Actions. So I wanted to start with this homepage so that you had a sense of what we're talking about as the way they promoted on, for lack of a better term, their marketing site for GitHub Actions. And what it basically lets you do is create automations for any kind of thing that you wish to automate. You can run it on multiple containers, Linux, Windows, Mac OS. That is actually very helpful, let's say for the CI, your testing suite use case. So when I build CI workflows on GitHub Actions, I always run them on as many operating systems as I can if I'm building an SDK. So I want my SDK to be able to make sure that it can work and the tests pass in a Mac environment, in a Windows environment, in a Linux environment, so that I know that my users who are using in all those environments works, right? You can build actions in numerous languages, as I mentioned, in Node and Python, Java, Ruby, PHP, Golang, Rust, .NET, and more, which is really cool because that basically means that whatever language you prefer, and we all as devs have a language we prefer. It may be a bit idiosyncratic. We may have hard times explaining it, but there's some languages we like writing in. And so you could do that in GitHub Actions and run it on Actions. So I want to show you what a standard CI build looks like on GitHub Actions. So what you see here is one of our community integrations. This one connects LinkedIn community data from your LinkedIn organization and brings it into your Orbit workspace. And this integration has a CI suite, right? And every time I push to the main branch or I open a pull request, it runs the CI suite. And this is the presentation of that CI suite in a table view. So for example, I incremented the version here on my way to release a new version of the gem. You can click through on any one of these and you can actually see the build. And you see I ran it on Ubuntu and I ran it on Mac, right? And for Ruby's 2.7 and Ruby 3, trying to keep support for across different versions of the language. I can click through to one of them, for example, and I can see that everything was successful. It set up the job successfully. It set up the language successfully, the Ruby environment. It installed all the dependencies of this particular gem successfully. I can look into that and make sure it looked okay. And it ran the test suite, which in this case was RSpec. It ran the 10 tests successfully and there was 0 failures. The job is complete and it's done. What's cool as well with this is you can actually add this as a tag to your README, right? So if I go to the README, and there it is. And I see the CI was passing, which is really neat. So that's a bit of introduction to GitHub Actions on its most common use case, which is a CI. What we've done at Orbit is we have taken GitHub Actions and created a way to use all of our community integrations. So we have community integrations for things like Stack Overflow, Meetup, LinkedIn, Reddit, YouTube, Circle, all other sorts of Pipedrive, which is a CRM, all other sorts of platforms, and we've created integrations for them. Notion is another example I see here, and etc. And what we've done is, so like most packages, so whether it's a Ruby gem or an NPM package or what have you, you can integrate that package into your code normally. So I'll go back here for a second. You can integrate that code normally into any application you're building. So this one happens to be built in Ruby. So let's say you're building some Ruby library. You can just, put this in your gem file in a Ruby context and require it and then use it, right? Every one of our integrations also has its own CLI. So you can run the package from your command line and do the data integration that way. So I can run on a command line, maybe I can make my own bash script and put it on a cron time schedule and have it run on my computer and be fine and happy. The third way, which is what we're going to talk about now, is the scheduling automation with GitHub. And the advantage of this is that whoever you are, no matter what skill level you come from, you can integrate this with GitHub Actions. It requires very little actual coding experience. In fact, no coding experience. What you need to do is learn how to open an account on GitHub, learn how to sign in and create an account, how to create a repository all throughout the UI, and then how to copy and paste what we've provided for you, and GitHub actually takes care of the rest. So these are the templates, right? And what we tell you is, so this is your first time using it. Here you need to create a GitHub account, create a repo, and add your credentials, and then pick the workflow. So let's say I wanted to run with the Meetup one, for example. So I would click through to the Meetup one, and I see 2 files in here. I see a YAML file. All the workflows on GitHub Actions are YAML, right? So I see a YAML file called meetup.yml, and I see a README. And I'm looking at the README, and the README tells me that this checks for new event RSVPs for a Meetup group and adds them to Orbit. So it tells me I need to copy the Meetup file into my own GitHub repository inside this folder path, git.github/workflows. And then I need to add the right credentials to my GitHub secrets in my repository. So, so I need to go here to settings in my GitHub repository, click down to secrets, and then add a new repository secret. And in this case, I need to add the URL name of my Meetup group. So if my Meetup group is Meetup group test 123, I need to add that as a secret into my repository secrets, because those are used as environment variables in the workflow. And then I go to the YAML, and I can see the YAML here. And I essentially copy this entirely, paste it into a file in my own repository, click save, make sure my secrets are the right ones I need, put them in that right place where we showed you. And then this is set to run at midnight once a day, every day. And it will automatically run for you and automatically import the data. And you'll see something like this. So here's an example of an open source community using the integrations. I found them on GitHub, public search on GitHub. I found that they run them, and they're actually running 2 of our integrations. One is for the dev blog and one is for YouTube. And you can see it looks very similar to the CI checks I showed you before, but here it's actually doing these community integrations. So this one was run 13 hours ago. It was successful. It checked for new dev interactions and added them to Orbit. This one checked for new YouTube comments and added them to Orbit. I can click through to it. I can see it, and I can even check it out here and see that there was no new comments in this run. So it fetched 0 comments and provided a time frame, but that's okay. And if it looked for them, didn't find any, that's great. But you could search for on GitHub for these integrations and find all kinds of communities already using them, which is really cool. And you can click through and see the workflows. Now, if you're not an owner of the repository and it's open source, you can't actually run the workflows, right? Clearly, but you can look at them. It's all open source. If you were the owner of the repository, you could also click through and run these workflows manually too, whenever you would like, which is pretty cool. And if we look at the actual workflow, what you see is for GitHub Actions, a pretty standard workflow. We provide it with a name. We tell it on when we want it to run, which on this case, we want it to run in 2 different instances. One is called schedule. This is all in the GitHub Actions documentation, by the way. And the schedule is a cron schedule. There's a lot of open source tooling which helps you build these expressions out. If they're, no one should be default if they can't remember exactly how to write cron expressions. And this one is called Workflow Dispatch, and this is what lets you run it manually from the UI whenever you want. And this is the actual job, and we call it a workflow for new comments or new meetup interactions. We say we want it to run on the Ubuntu environment. It could run on the Mac environment also. We run in the Linux environment. We set up the right programming language environment. In this case, it's Ruby. In the other ones, it might be a Node environment. We install the gem, Meetup Orbit, and then we run it. And this is the CLI command, right? So we're running the CLI. This is as if you're running the CLI in your command line, but now we're running it in GitHub Actions command line instead, right? That's basically the difference. And this is the important part where you pass in your credentials and you pass them in the form of repository secrets. This is the syntax for it, $, curly brace, secrets dot, the name of the secret. So there's always 2 that are needed, always. And then depending on the integration, will be different ones. So in this case, you just need the meetup URL name, but you always will also need your API key from Orbit, and you'll need your workspace ID from Orbit or where to post these things to. And then, as I mentioned, you'll see them post, and they'll happen by themselves every single day or whatever the schedule is, and it'll get added to your Orbit workspace. What this actually looks like. So we've been talking a lot about this Orbit workspace. What is that? So this is a test workspace. This is minimal amount of data. This is kind of one of my playground workspaces I use just to kind of experiment with and make sure things are working. So when you come onto your Orbit workspace for the first time, what you'll see is kind of a high-level view of all your activities across all the different platforms that your community lives on. And this is a high-level view. You'll see some really important segmentations of your community here, like your most active members in the past week, the new and promising members, people that are kind of rising up who are just joining. And this one I think is quite important, which is people who over the past 30 days are starting to drift away, meaning their rate of engagement based on their prior rates of engagement is starting to drop off. This list is important for you as a community manager to really stay on top of. For example, you take a look at this. Here's one of that member that's drifting away, and you get their username, you get some contact information. This is their meetup ID, but it could also be in here, all their identities, where you would see their LinkedIn profile name, their Stack Overflow username, their GitHub profile, whatever you've integrated with, and their timeline of all their activities. Again, this is just a test workspace, so you don't have too much in here. And this right here, you can create a note. So I created just a sample note. This is, not any meaningful data, but you can create a note about the person, add them. But what I want to show you for the purpose of this demo is this is the Meetup integration right here. This is pulling from the Meetup API. I happen to pick Docker Bangalore, has tons of events all the time. Very active, Meetup user group, which is just helpful if you're trying to build a Meetup integration to find one that's having tons of events all the time. If you're anywhere near Bangalore, I probably would recommend going to them. They look like awesome. I haven't been there yet, but it's on my list of things to do. And you see that Vinod has RSVP'd for DevOps India Conference 2021, right? So we've added his RSVP, which if this was a full functioning workspace, would be incorporated with all of his other activity. And that's interesting because that's another element of his engagement. And these all are based on these integrations. Let me make this zoom out a little bit. based on all these integrations. So this is the Community Ruby one for LinkedIn, but this could also be the Meetup one. And here is the Circle one. And the code for it, you don't have to know too much Ruby, but essentially the code for it is I've abstracted all of the HTTP calls to the Orbit API, and in this case, in this one here, the Circle API, it could have been the Meetup API, whatever. And I do all that work for you. And I've done that work by I'm starting to build a suite of modularized SDK libraries instead of a Kinship Sync SDK that abstracts a lot of the HTTP calls. So, this is called the Ruby Orbit Activities, which is, part of a suite of modular SDK libraries. And this one here manages all the activities endpoint of the Orbit API. And essentially, you tell it what you want to do, which is in this case, I want to add a new activity, right? And okay, when it's a new activity, I want to call a new activity. What is a new activity? It's a method which invokes the post method. I kind of grab the HTTP post method and I rewrite it a bit myself, which is something beautiful you can do in Ruby with a bit of metaprogramming. And to provide it with the URL, the user agent, the API key, and the actual body of the new activity. So if I would go here, I would see that I have this thing called posts somewhere in here. Did I skip over it? I did. It's right there. And it's essentially a relatively straightforward post method, right? Anyone who's written HTTP calls, this will look very familiar. Specify the URI, create a new post instance. It's a JSON, accept JSON. The content type is JSON. The authorization is a bearer key. And the body is the body. And I also go through and make sure to handle rate limitations of the API for you and take care of that work for you. And I also validate the payload for you and make sure if there's any errors, I present the errors to you in a way that's manageable. And if it's not, I just present to you the response body. That's a bit of the run through. So these are being used out in the wild, which is really cool to see. This is where it is. These are really cool to see. And the way I search for this, by the way, is as easy as this. I looked across all of GitHub. I know this is the name of the gem that does, let's say, the dev community to Orbit integrations. So I just searched for that all across all of GitHub. I find 41 instances of code where it lives. And I found this wonderful repository in the open source that's using it. I also see, that we're using it, which is great. And I see that this company is using it, which is great. And another one is using it. And I can click through to it. So I can click right there. Here's DeepNote, which is, I think, an AI machine learning Python-based company. I can look at their actions. And I see 1 hour ago, they ran for Reddit, 2 hours ago for Reddit, 3 hours ago for Reddit. They're running Reddit quite a lot. Let's take a peek at one of them, see if there was any data in it. Not data in that one. It says fetch 0 posts, but it looks like they're running for 9 different jobs for 9 different subreddits. I see here data science, machine learning, learn Python, learn machine learning, deep learning, visualization. Data is beautiful. Victor, data really is beautiful. SQL and all of
Yeah, I'm looking to this demo and the things what you can do in the open internet. It's really beautiful. And this data.
Isn't that amazing? I love the open source world that I can search for something on GitHub and I can come across worlds of communities using the same kind of package, the same thing, and get insights into, their processes. And we're all sharing this. So that's a bit of a walkthrough of what we've done. And what I love about this is exactly where I can't remember right now, but there's a great thread where in one of the integrations where a user opened an issue and said, I'm not a developer. And I love what you've done here because what you've done is enabled me to do this. Like you've created a path where I'm not a dev. I don't know how to write code. I don't know how to run things on a command line. You open a terminal on your computer and you feel it's easy. For me, that's intimidating, right? But I want to have this kind of connectivity. And you've made that possible for me. And honestly, as an advocate, that's one of the best feelings.
Exactly. Yes. It sounds like a really great, maybe I will sound like a marketer, but it's a serverless automation platform, right? So essentially you're not paying anything if you're doing this like as small integrations. You don't need to manage your servers clusters and things like that, but you can do a lot of things. Even with the free tier, you said like 2,000 calls per day.
2,000 minutes a month, which is quite a lot, runtime minutes.
Yeah.
For most communities, that's a lot.
Yeah. And it's exciting that you already provide like a dashboard where this information can be integrated and this information can be aggregated. And as a community manager, as a product manager, as a developer advocate, this is like a very useful tool to understand where your users are and where you can meet them, and try to see how you can help to solving their problems, to solving or like helping them solving their business tasks or their business problems and things like that. I think it was very exciting. I think it's inspiring. The last quote that you mentioned, that the person who reached out and asked like how we can do this, and it's pretty cool that you don't need to pretty much know anything. It's this integration, copy paste, and once you hooked in, you will be excited to learn more and dig a little bit deeper. And after that, you will explore,
Totally.
there's a terminals. There's some stuff that they can do also locally and develop something. I want to change the format, how this data would be reported or something
How do I
like that.
can do that? Exactly.
Yeah. That's kind of like a rabbit hole. All right.
And as I said, so I tend to write mine in Ruby, but they can be written in anything. And we have a whole other suite of them in Node as well, and Python. And I just happen, I'm a bit biased towards Ruby. And so that's what I'm writing in. But it could be anything. That's the point.
Totally fine. Whatever languages make you productive, you use this language, these tools. So that's totally fine. One last question. It's kind of like a little bit exclusive thing for our watchers on YouTube. I usually ask my guests about the book that they were reading recently. It not necessarily needs to be, technical book. It can be technical book, but it can be fiction, science fiction. It can be, I don't know, business, like self-improvement, self-development, something that you read, and it sparked some of the emotions in you.
Oh, okay. I read a lot of books. I'm sure you do too. I just finished one novel, which was phenomenal. It was called The Midnight Library. Have you seen this yet?
No, not yet.
It's really, I think it's a bit new, and it's really good. It raises some in a form of a story. It raises a lot of questions around, if you could go back in life and redo things, would that make things better? Basically, like, is it? And it dives into that question through a story and makes you think. Like, you often think to yourself, if only I had another chance, I would have done it this way or that way. But is that really the right question to be asking yourself? And would that have made you a happier, more satisfied person if you could actually go back? Really thought-provoking, short novel. You can really sit and read through it in one sitting, but you'll sit with it also for a long time after you're done reading it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for recommending this. Ladies and gentlemen, Ben Greenberg from Orbit.love. Check out some of the examples of this GitHub automation. Thank you so much. It was super exciting thing to talking to you. Thank you so much for being the part of Concast.
Thanks to everyone out there for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. Make sure to hit that like button now.
And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a new episode.
Don't forget to drop us a comment if you have any questions for today's guest, or if there's a topic you'd like to see us cover in the future.
And we will see you on the next episode of Concast.